The night was all glitter and grandeur. Along the glowing shoreline of a luxury resort, champagne flutes clinked and silk gowns shimmered beneath swaying lanterns. Laughter and polished smiles filled the air as high society celebrated yet another opulent milestone. But for Benedict Carrington, the celebrated CEO of Azure Crest Resorts, the illusion shattered with a single trembling voice. "Sir, she's too weak to beg," came the barely audible plea. At first he thought it a ghost of his conscience buried under years of corporate success and hollow charm, but then he turned and saw her. A little girl, no more than 4, barefoot and frail, stood just outside the elegant marble terrace. Her dress was worn thin, her eyes hollow but fierce, clutching a crumpled flyer bearing his face. Benedict's instincts kicked in. This wasn't a scene meant for the elite crowd behind him. He raised a hand, halting the advancing security guards, and met the child's gaze. Her fingers, icy and shaking, wrapped around his own. "Please," she whispered. With no idea why, Benedict let her lead him away from the glittering event and into the shadows. Down cobbled paths and past luxury cars, the girl brought him to a rusted sedan hidden in the furthest corner of the lot. Something inside it stirred, a slow, tremulous movement. When Benedict opened the boot, his world cracked open. There, crumpled and barely conscious, lay a woman he had once loved more than life itself, Clara Moreau. 5 years ago, Clara had disappeared after a supposed car accident. The police found the wreckage, but no body. She had been declared dead, mourned, forgotten, until now. Clara's body was bruised and starved, her blonde hair tangled like the years that had passed in silence. The little girl tugged at his coat again and whispered, "She's my mummy." Her name was Mia, and Benedict's heart told him what his mind couldn't yet process. This child was his daughter. As he lifted Clara's frail body into his arms and called for help, the sounds of laughter from the resort faded behind him. The past was no longer buried. It was breathing, fragile, and in desperate need of healing. What followed was a journey that would rip open old wounds, expose unthinkable betrayals, and force Benedict to confront the shadows in his own bloodline. But at the center of it all stood a child's faith, a woman's strength, and a man's choice to turn away from power and step toward redemption, because sometimes the smallest hand can pull us back to everything that truly matters. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and hushed urgency, but for Benedict Carrington it was the silence that deafened him. As the doctors wheeled Clara into emergency care, Mia clutched his hand tightly, her small frame pressed close to him as if anchoring herself to the one person who hadn't disappeared. She hadn't cried, she hadn't trembled, but her eyes, they held years far beyond her 4. She watched everything, catalogued every word, every movement. Benedict couldn't help but wonder how long she'd been surviving, not living. Minutes later, he stood in a dull children's waiting room filled with forgotten toys and faded posters. Mia sat with a coloring book, quietly scribbling suns and waves with broken crayons. She looked up at him with calm certainty and said, "She sings to me when I cry, even if she's hurting." His throat tightened. That lullaby, he remembered it. French, soft, something Clara used to hum in his arms during rainstorms. That memory hit like lightning, sudden and bittersweet. He hadn't truly understood until now how much he'd lost when Clara disappeared. She wasn't just his love. She had been his light, his anchor in a world obsessed with control and image. And yet here she was, alive, broken but breathing, and beside her, the daughter he never knew existed. The past 5 years blurred in his mind. Board meetings, interviews, expansion plans, all meaningless next to this quiet, devastating truth. He had built an empire to fill the void she left behind. Now he would burn it all down just to see her smile again. As the doctors worked behind closed doors, Benedict made calls. First, to block the press, then to hire private investigators. He needed answers. How Clara had survived, who had hurt her, and most urgently, how deep the betrayal ran. That night, Mia fell asleep on his lap, and he stared out the hospital window as if the stars might offer some absolution. Clara had not just been missing, she had been stolen, sold, traded like currency. And Mia had been born into that nightmare and somehow had found her way to him, guided only by a discarded flyer and the hope her mother had instilled in her. She always said you were real, Mia had whispered. Those words echoed in his chest. Clara had survived horrors with only love to guide her, a love that had refused to die. When he finally stepped into Clara's room the next morning, she stirred at the sound of his voice. Her eyes fluttered open, swollen with pain and memory, and for a moment fear sparked across her face. "You're not real," she rasped, retreating into herself. "You're not safe." But Benedict only stepped closer and said gently, "You're safe now. You're home." He watched the wall she'd built begin to crack, and when Mia climbed into the chair beside her and whispered, "Draw, Mummy," everything shifted. Clara reached for the pencil with trembling fingers. The lines she traced were crooked, chaotic, but they were hers. Not lines of pain, but attempts at healing. For the first time in years, she was more than someone's prisoner. She was Mia's mother. She was an artist. She was Clara. Benedict knew this would not be a straight road. Healing never is. But as he watched Clara try to draw, try to feel again, and Mia curl against her mother's side like she belonged there all along, he felt something bloom quietly in his chest. Not just responsibility, not just guilt, but a fierce, overwhelming devotion. They were his family, they had always been, and now that he had found them, nothing, not power, not legacy, not even his past, would come between them again. That was the beginning of something real. Not the polished illusion of luxury he had built, but a life rooted in truth, in survival, and above all, in love that never gave up. Clara's recovery in the hospital was not a dramatic awakening, but a slow, trembling reintroduction to a world she no longer recognized. The sterile white walls, the gentle hum of machines, and the quiet presence of the man she once loved. It all felt like a dream stitched together with threads too fragile to hold. She would wake suddenly, disoriented, gasping in fear, her hand clenching the sheets as if the shadows might return. But each time Benedict was there, still in his crumpled designer suit from the gala, looking exhausted yet resolute, offering her water or soup, never forcing, only waiting. Mia rarely left her side. The little girl would hum soft lullabies, sketch pictures of beaches and sunlight, and press her tiny hand into her mother's, anchoring her to the present. Clara barely spoke at first. Her voice had grown raw with silence, her soul guarded by trauma. But there were glimmers, fleeting moments when her fingers would brush Mia's hair, or when she'd study Benedict's face a little longer. Confusion melting into something else. Memory. Each detail from those missing years emerged in fractured pieces. Clara confessed in hushed tones the unspeakable, how she had been taken, moved from one dark place to another, her name erased, her body traded, her identity shattered. She spoke of numbers, of metal doors and whispered threats, of pregnancies stolen and nights survived only by whispering a single name, Ben. Her only constant, her only hope, had been the memory of the man who once held her in his arms and promised her the world without cages. Benedict listened with his jaw clenched and his heart breaking anew. He realized then that love was no longer about flowers or promises. It was about staying, about showing up through the ruins. In those early days, Clara couldn't meet her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes saw only what had been taken, but Benedict, gently and without pride, began reminding her of what still remained. He brought Mia's drawings into her room each morning. Pictures of a family with smiling faces beneath a golden sun, a girl holding hands with a man and a woman. "That's us," Mia would declare with confidence only a child could muster. Benedict never corrected her. He saw it too. Every time Clara's hands trembled over a pencil, Benedict would sit beside her with Mia, drawing alongside them. A beach, a lighthouse, a quiet cabin surrounded by pines, images of hope, of future. They didn't speak about the company, the wealth, the headlines swirling outside the hospital walls. Those things no longer defined him. What mattered was here, in this room, with a woman rediscovering herself and a little girl with eyes full of stars. It was on the third morning that Clara, in a moment of soft exhaustion, whispered to Benedict, "Did you know she is yours?" The room seemed to stop breathing. He looked at Mia, curled in the chair beside the bed, and then at Clara, whose eyes brimmed with tears, not of fear now, but of sorrow long carried. "I suspected," he replied, voice hoarse, "but I didn't know. Not until now." She nodded slowly. "I wanted to tell you, but they took everything. I was afraid if you knew you'd be hurt too." He reached for her hand and clasped it gently. "You're not alone anymore. No fanfare, no grand vows, just a simple, grounded truth." And so the healing continued, not with miracles, but with the gentle repetition of kindness. Clara began eating small bites of soup he made himself. She began brushing Mia's hair with a shaking hand. She tried drawing again, this time without weeping. Benedict never pushed, only walked with her step by step as if learning to breathe all over again. Their past was no longer something to escape. It was a foundation from which something stronger, more real, could be built. A truth neither power nor time had been able to destroy. And in the quiet of those moments, surrounded by crayons, lullabies, and unspoken forgiveness, a new family began to form, not born of perfect circumstances, but forged in survival, trust, and the unwavering belief that even after everything, love could still grow in the cracks of broken things. Clara sat in the hospital room, her body still weak but her mind beginning to stir. The weight of the past hadn't left. How could it? The scars weren't just physical. They lived deep in her spirit. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that basement, nameless and voiceless, a ghost of herself. But now, in the quiet between beeping machines and the soft murmur of nurses outside the door, something had shifted. A small pencil lay on the tray beside her bed, placed there by Mia, who had drawn a picture of their family. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sky bursting with light. It was childlike and imprecise, but to Clara it was a masterpiece, because in that simple drawing her daughter had given her permission to imagine a future. That night Clara picked up the pencil. Her hand trembled, lines jagged and uncertain. She wasn't drawing beauty, she was drawing pain. But through the smudged charcoal and the scratch of paper she began to remember herself. Each day brought a little more color back into her world. Benedict didn't hover, didn't question. He simply sat nearby, sketching beside her and Mia, his tall frame curled over crayons like it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't speak much during these moments, but they didn't need to. When she glanced at him, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't dared hope for. Respect. Not pity, not guilt, but a quiet reverence for her survival. He never pushed her to speak about what had happened. Instead, he asked her about the things they used to dream of. An art studio by the sea, traveling exhibitions, painting murals for children's hospitals. At first, those dreams felt distant, too clean for a woman like her. But slowly, with each line she drew, she began to wonder, what if they weren't gone? One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the window in thin golden streaks, Clara asked for watercolors. The nurse looked surprised but obliged. With Mia watching excitedly from the foot of the bed, Clara dipped the brush into blue paint and drew soft strokes across the page. It wasn't much, just the sea meeting the horizon, but when she looked down at it, her breath caught. It was the place she used to escape to in her mind during those darkest nights, her safe place, her own sanctuary. Now it had come to life on paper. Benedict saw the change too. That evening he brought in a small canvas and quietly set up a makeshift easel in the room. "If you're ready," he said softly. No rush. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that healing wasn't a linear journey, but art could be a bridge back to herself. With Benedict's gentle encouragement and Mia's boundless love, Clara began to teach herself to believe again. Not in the world, that would take time, but in the small, stubborn flame that still flickered within her. It had never gone out. Even after everything, it had waited. She began to ask for colors she hadn't used in years, sunset orange, lilac, and emerald green, tones of life, not pain. Mia often joined her, adding silly faces and clouds with hearts in the center. And Benedict. He painted with the clumsiness of a man who'd never held a brush before, but Clara cherished each attempt. His efforts weren't about skill, they were about presence. One night, Clara painted something different. It wasn't a beach or a memory. It was a closed car trunk with a small beam of light shining through the edge, a child's hand reaching out from the shadows. She didn't explain what it meant. She didn't need to. Benedict saw it and quietly placed it in the corner of the room, facing the window where the morning light could illuminate it. "You're not just surviving anymore," he told her. "You're remembering who you are." Those words sank into her soul deeper than any reassurance could. The transformation wasn't sudden. There were still days she couldn't pick up a brush, still nights when she cried silently into her pillow, haunted by shadows no light could fully erase. But now, those moments weren't the end of her story. They were simply part of it. She was more than what had been done to her. She was a mother, an artist, a survivor, and she was slowly becoming something even more powerful, a voice. And in that quiet hospital room where past met present and possibility began to whisper, Clara held Benedict's hand and knew she was coming back to life. The rain whispered softly against the hospital windows the morning Clara finally told him. She had been watching him from her bed, the way he sat beside Mia, carefully tying the laces of her worn shoes as if they were silk ribbons. The way he listened when Mia spoke, not distracted or rushed, but with his full presence, as though every word their daughter said mattered more than the noise of the world outside. It broke something open in Clara. For so long she had held her story in silence, afraid it would shatter what little safety they had found. But now, with Benedict here, not as the man she once loved in a distant, dazzling life, but as the man who stayed, she finally found the strength to speak. "I have to tell you something," she whispered, voice trembling. He turned immediately, concern etched into his brow, but said nothing, only moved closer and took her hand, waiting. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth in the room. She looked down at their intertwined hands and let herself remember the way she used to believe in fairy tales. "Lily," she said, "she's your daughter." For a moment silence stretched between them, but it was not the kind that hurt. It was the breath before truth settles. Benedict's lips parted, and for the first time in all their conversation since she'd been found, she saw tears in his eyes. "I had hoped," he whispered, "but I didn't know." Clara's voice cracked. "I wanted to tell you, but they kept me, moved me like I was nothing. I didn't even know if I would live long enough to meet her. When she was born, I thought she had been taken too." Her chest heaved with the weight of memories. "But one day I woke up and she was in my arms. Someone must have made a mistake, or maybe it was mercy. I named her Mia because it meant mine. She was the only thing they couldn't take from me." Benedict's hand didn't loosen. In fact, he held her tighter, anchoring her. "You gave her everything, Clara, even when you had nothing." She closed her eyes. "There was another," she said, the words barely audible. "Before Mia, another baby. I never saw her face. They took her when I was too weak to fight." Her voice broke entirely then, and Benedict moved from his chair to kneel beside her bed. He didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around her and held her as if he could absorb her grief into his own bones. Her tears soaked his shirt, and still he didn't let go. "I thought if you knew all of this," she whispered, "you'd never look at me the same." He pulled back only enough to look into her eyes. "You survived hell, Clara, and still, you protected her. You loved her. And me. I never stopped loving you." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Not when I thought you were gone. Not even when I tried to forget." They sat like that for a long time, until Mia tiptoed into the room and nestled herself beside her mother, wrapping her small arms around Clara's waist. Benedict placed a hand on Mia's back and whispered, "She told me about her dreams. She wanted a sister once. She told me she wished her mom could smile more." Clara's lips quivered. "I want that too," she said. That night, the three of them lay side by side in the hospital bed, too small for comfort, but just big enough for closeness. Mia drifted off between them, her breath a steady rhythm of innocence and trust. Clara looked at Benedict, her eyes rimmed red but no longer hopeless. "I thought I was too broken to be a mother, to be a partner, to be anything at all." He shook his head gently. "You're not broken, Clara. You were made to endure, and now you're choosing to heal. And that's the bravest thing I've ever seen." She didn't reply with words. Instead, she reached for his hand under the blanket and threaded her fingers through his. Outside, the storm had passed, and moonlight spilled across the floor like a soft promise. The past was still with them, unerasable, but in that moment, Clara realized something had changed. Her secrets had not driven him away. Her pain had not made her unworthy. If anything, it had made their love real, grounded in truth, not fantasy. She kissed Mia's forehead, then turned to Benedict. "I want to build something with you," she said. "Not what we had before, but something new, Something honest. He smiled, eyes glistening. Then let's begin. And in the hush of the night, surrounded by hospital walls and soft, snoring breath, they began again. Not as the people they once were, but as the family they had become through survival, forgiveness, and a love that refused to let go. Benedict sat alone in his study, the glow from his laptop screen casting pale light across the oak desk as pages upon pages of financial records flickered before his eyes. He hadn't slept in days. Each line of digits, each transaction was a thread unraveling a truth so monstrous it made his chest ache. For weeks he dug discreetly, quietly reaching out to contacts in law enforcement, ex-investigators, even retired journalists with ties to Eastern Europe. He'd pretended all was normal at the office, attended board meetings at Luxmeyer as if nothing had changed. But inside, his world was coming undone. The trail of money was unmistakable. Millions filtered through shell charities based in Romania, Bulgaria, and other countries often spoken of in hushed tones when trafficking came up. All the donations were filed under the name Mr. Hale, his surname, his father's alias. His breath caught when he saw the date of one major transaction, 5 years ago to the day Clara vanished. He dropped his head into his hands, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. He remembered that year clearly. The headlines, the wreckage found on the cliffs, the memorial he'd organized, the way his father had urged him to move on. "Some things are simply lost, son," Gregory had said, his voice cool and controlled like he'd rehearsed it. Now Benedict knew why it had felt rehearsed, because it was a lie. The final confirmation came not in numbers but in something far more personal. Tucked away in a locked drawer in the Hale family vault, beneath rare watches and confidential contracts, Benedict found a gold pendant engraved with the initials CJ, Clara Jameson. He remembered giving it to her at university beneath the old willow tree, just after she'd finished painting her first commissioned piece. She'd worn it every day. Seeing it here, hidden among his father's private relics, made Benedict's blood run cold. He stood frozen, the silence of the house roaring in his ears. Gregory hadn't just known what happened to Clara, he had orchestrated it. The fury came later, slow and suffocating. At first it was disbelief, denial, but the evidence was too clear. His father had funded the very organization that held Clara captive. He had stolen her, erased her because she threatened the narrative, because love and independence and truth had no place in the empire Gregory Hale built. Benedict returned to the hospital that night, standing quietly outside Clara's room. Lily was asleep beside her, arms curled tightly around her mother's waist. Clara, still frail but awake, looked at him with wary eyes as if she could sense the storm within him. "I need to ask you something," he said softly. She sat up slowly, nodding. "In the places they kept you, did you ever hear the name Mr. Hale?" Her face paled instantly. She nodded, tears already welling. "Yes, they called him the benefactor. They said our pain was paid for. Charity, they laughed. It was never charity." Benedict felt the floor tilt beneath him. He took a step closer, knelt at her side, and laid the pendant in her hand. "This was in my father's safe." Clara's fingers trembled. "I thought I'd lost it," she whispered. "He kept it all these years." "I think he kept it because it was a trophy," Benedict said, his voice cracking. "Not a memory." The next morning, Benedict walked into his father's office, a thick folder of evidence in hand. Gregory was seated, sipping whiskey like it was any other Tuesday. "You taught me how to hide secrets," Benedict said coldly, placing the documents on the desk. "But I never realized I'd need that knowledge to expose you." Gregory barely looked up. "If you're here to moralize, save your breath." "I'm not here to moralize, I'm here to end this." That night, Benedict returned to Clara with the truth. She wept, not out of shock, she had suspected, but from the relief that someone finally knew, someone finally believed. He held her through it, through the grief, the guilt, the shattering of everything she had endured alone. "He will never touch another life again," he whispered, "I promise." For Benedict, it was the moment everything shifted. Luxmeyer would no longer be his legacy, justice would. And Clara and Lily would be his reason to start again. The hospital hallway was quiet, blanketed in soft evening light as Benedict stepped back into Clara's room. In his hand was a small sketchbook, Lily's, with a drawing she'd left on the tray earlier. a child reaching toward the sun from the shadow of a trunk. He stared at it for a long while before gently placing it on the bedside table beside Clara's bed. Clara was asleep, her features still drawn and fragile, but her breath steady. Lily was curled into her mother's side like a small bird in a nest, her thumb in her mouth, one hand still holding the corner of her sketch pad. Benedict didn't want to disturb them, and yet something about this quiet moment called to him, like it was asking him not to just stand there, but to become part of it. He pulled a chair close and sat down carefully, not making a sound. His eyes moved between the woman he had once loved and the little girl he was only now beginning to understand. Lily was more than just Clara's child. She was hope incarnate. She was the light that had pulled Clara through unimaginable darkness. And in some strange, aching way, she had also saved Benedict, if not for her brave heart, for her whisper at the party, for her tiny hand pulling him from the glittering terrace and into the truth. He might never have known Clara was alive, might never have seen how deep the rot ran in his own family's empire. The moment Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open, Benedict leaned forward. Their gazes met, and the silence between them was tender, fragile. "You came back," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "I never left," he replied quietly. "Not in the ways that mattered." She closed her eyes again, but this time tears escaped and slipped down her cheeks. "I'm not the woman you remember," she said. "I know," he answered, "but I'm not the man I was either." She looked at him then, not with the pain of the past, but with a searching, cautious kind of trust. Lily stirred at her side, opening her eyes slowly before sitting up and reaching for Benedict. Without thinking, he opened his arms and she crawled into his lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His throat tightened as she laid her head against his chest. "You're not scared of me?" he asked her softly. Lily shook her head. "Mummy said you were kind once." "I want to be kind again," he murmured. "I want to be someone you can count on." That was the beginning. Not the dramatic sort, not one with fanfare or declarations, but the gentle kind, the kind that forms in hospital rooms and silence. Benedict didn't rush Clara. He brought her food each day, even if she barely ate. He helped Lily with her drawings, brought new crayons, read stories aloud when Clara was too weak to do so. He stayed quietly, not pushing, not pretending to fix anything, just there. It wasn't pity, it was presence, and it mattered. Over the next few days, something small but unmistakable shifted. Clara began sitting up more. She drank warm tea. She spoke of memories, mostly Lily's. "She hums to herself while drawing," she said once, "even when she's sad." Benedict smiled. "She's like you. She turns pain into color." The two of them watched Lily play, and the room slowly filled with life. One afternoon, as Clara held a pencil in her shaky fingers trying to sketch again, Benedict knelt beside her. "Let the lines be messy," he whispered. "It's not about perfection anymore. It's about truth." She looked at him then, eyes soft with tears. "You really stayed." "I told Lily I would," he said, "and I meant it." That night, as Lily curled between them on the small hospital cot, Clara whispered into the darkness, "Did you know she was yours?" "I didn't," Benedict replied honestly, "but I hoped. And now that I do, I won't let her down." He reached for Clara's hand, and after a long hesitation, she placed her fingers in his. They sat like that, a tangle of brokenness and courage, not sure what the next day would bring, but certain that they'd face it together. The morning light spilled gently through the hospital blinds, casting soft shadows across the pale blue sheets where Clara lay. Her eyes closed, breath steady but shallow. On the bedside table, Lily's newest drawing rested, a sun peeking through dark storm clouds, its rays reaching down toward a small figure at the bottom of the page. Benedict stood quietly by the window, gazing out over the car park, but not really seeing it. His thoughts were a swirl of grief, guilt, and something quietly rising. Resolve. In the past few days, he had begun to understand a truth that pierced deeper than any headline or ledger sheet. Healing would not come from press releases or courtroom victories. It would come from constancy, from showing up, from being there. He turned slowly toward the room's center. Clara stirred under the covers, her hand twitching slightly before settling on the sheet beside her. Benedict moved closer, setting a small tray on the table. tea, toast with a hint of jam, and a crumpled serviette Lily had insisted on decorating with stars and hearts. He pulled up a chair, careful not to wake Clara just yet, and sat with his hands clasped, elbows on his knees. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he didn't know how to, but in this quiet his presence was enough. Lily appeared at the door moments later, rubbing sleep from her eyes and clutching her worn sketch pad. She tiptoed into the room, her little socks making no sound against the floor, and climbed into Benedict's lap without a word. He wrapped his arms around her gently. She was so small, so light, and yet she carried a strength that had shaken his world apart. She had saved Clara. She had saved him. Her voice came in a whisper. "Will Mummy get better now?" He kissed the top of her head. "She will, but it will take time. We're going to help her." The word "we" settled into the room like a promise. It wasn't just Benedict stepping into a role anymore. It was all of them, mother, daughter, and the man learning to be both guardian and redeemer. Clara stirred again, this time her eyes blinking open. She saw them and let out a small, breathless sound, somewhere between a sigh and a sob. Benedict reached for her hand. "I didn't want to wake you," he said softly. "You didn't," she whispered, her fingers brushing his. "You were just here," he nodded. "I'll keep being here, as long as it takes." Her gaze moved to Lily, whose head rested peacefully against his chest. A flicker of something passed over her face. Fear, longing, hope. She looked down at the tray. "Did Lily draw that again?" He smiled. "She said it was the sun coming back." Clara exhaled shakily. "It always does, doesn't it, even after everything?" "It does," Benedict said, "because people like you made it through the dark." For a long moment there were no more words, just the steady rhythm of machines, the faint hum of life beyond the hospital window, and the unspoken truth that healing had already begun. It would not be linear, it would not be simple, but it had started. In the days that followed, Benedict's life shifted completely. He stepped away from the boardroom, from headlines, from any place where power was worn like armor. Instead, he took Lily to the hospital gift shop to choose new crayons. He helped Clara sit up when her arms trembled. He brought soup, stories, and silence. Most importantly, he brought himself, no longer the man trained to hide behind wealth and legacy, but the man stripped bare and choosing love anyway. There were moments when Clara shook uncontrollably, memories lashing at her like wind through broken glass. In those moments, Benedict did not flinch. He held her hand, wiped her tears, and told her what no one had ever dared say. "You survived. You're allowed to feel everything." One afternoon, Clara asked if she could try drawing again. Her fingers trembled so badly at first that the lines on the page were jagged and chaotic. But Benedict didn't comment. He simply sat beside her, helping Lily blend colors while Clara gripped her pencil like a lifeline. It wasn't art yet. It was pain being poured out. And somehow that was even more beautiful. Eventually, the drawing took shape. A sunrise over water, a child's figure silhouetted on the shore, and beside her, two taller figures standing close. When Clara showed it to him, Benedict felt tears rise. Not for the past, but for what was forming now. Fragile, yes, but real. He looked at her and said, "We're building something, aren't we?" She nodded, voice catching. "We are." As the final light of day filtered through the wooden beams of their quiet cabin, Clara sat with a pencil in hand. Her daughter Lily curled against her side, and Benedict watching from across the room. No longer was she the ghost of a vanished woman, defined by pain and survival. She was now a mother, an artist, and a voice returning from silence. Her strokes on the paper no longer trembled from fear, they danced with hope. And beside her, the man who had once lost everything now found purpose in rebuilding not just a family, but a future forged in truth. Benedict hadn't chosen the easy path. He had surrendered a legacy built on lies, confronted the darkness within his own family, and walked away from power to protect something far more sacred, love. Together, the three of them began to stitch together a life of healing. No headlines, no applause, just small, steady acts of courage. A meal shared, a song hummed, a drawing passed from one trembling hand to another. And in those moments we see the lesson so many of us forget in the noise of the world. True love does not seek comfort, it seeks truth. Healing isn't a destination, but a choice we make every day, often in silence, often in the arms of those who see us for who we are, not who we were forced to become. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of love that refuses to give up, of the quiet strength in starting again, then let your voice join ours. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part of the story touched you most. Like this video if it stirred something in your heart. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories 88, where every week we bring you tales of resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that saves lives. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this, and maybe they'll begin to heal too. Thank you for watching, and remember, every soul has a story. Maybe yours is next.